Good afternoon, entities. It is Fred Campos, and this is message number 14 on May the 11th, 2025. I want to wish all of you ladies a very happy Mother's Day. Previously, I told you that we were going to talk about taxes for the taxpayer. The previous 13 episodes have really focused in on the impact that's had to the entities. But what about the taxpayers? Now that TAD is going forward with the reappraisal plan, and now those line postcards have been mailed to your house, it's time to talk about the impact on the taxpayer. Is the reappraisal plan, by holding down values for 3 years, good for the taxpayer? Or will it, as I am predicting, have a very negative impact? We're going to look at 5 scenarios. I'm going to break it down to a third grade level, not because I believe there are third graders out there, but figuring out tax is very, very complicated. Now, some critics are going to say, Fred, you're going to use a nickel to represent 5%. And, you're going to say, hey, the 10-year rate has been 6.6% in Tarrant County, and the 20-year rate has been as high as 7.8%. But we're going to use 5%. I'm going to show you some data. I've got some details at the very, very end where you can look at the references and look at these slides. And we're going to talk about and look at some different things and how they're calculated. Now, I am going to use historical data that's publicly available. You can Google it, from the Tarrant County Appraisal District. And I'm also going to use data that comes from something that you can go and look up yourself. It is called FRED, which stands for, it's the Federal Reserve Economic Data. And it gives us snapshots that we can look at. And we can look at them over the 10 years or 20 years. So let's look at this first slide, and you can study this on your own time. This first slide is going to show you that for looking at both of those sources and analyzing them over a 20-year period, we can see that the average annual increase over the last 20 years, with the exception of just 1 year, which we'll talk about when we get to scenario number 3, is 6.6%. Check that out. And then if we really compress it over the last 10 years, the average annual increase has been 7.8%. Now, I know what some critics are going to say. Well, Fred, you're talking about averages. If you look at an individual house property value, maybe it's gone up, maybe it's gone down, maybe you've protested it. But also, average means that there have been some values that have been less than 7.8%. And obviously, there's some values that have gone up a lot, like even 20% in 1 year, so that we get an average. Now, out of those 19 years, it has gone up 19 of the 20. And out of the last 10 years, it's gone up all 10. And you can debate numbers regarding averages. And I realize that your particular home taxpayer may not be average. So you got some that are going to be higher than what I'm going to present and lower than what I'm going to present. But for the purpose of today's lesson, we're going to assume a 5%. And I'm going to show that as a nickel. So here we go. The very first scenario, scenario number 1, is what would the tax rate be if we hadn't done the reappraisal plan? What has it been for the past 40 plus years? And so in doing that, I'm going to show you what we'll call scenario 1. So, my dear taxpayers, we're going to pretend in this scenario that your property is worth $1. We're going to use $1 as our baseline. Now, I know your property is worth more than that, but you can multiply it times 100,000 if you need to. So we're going to pretend in this scenario, in this example, which we'll use in all 5 scenarios, that your annual appraisal value was 95 cents, and then you were appraised at $1 in 2024. Now, in scenario number 1, we're going to assume that your value is going to increase by 5%, and I will use a nickel to represent that. So had we not done the appraisal plan, you would have paid taxes on your property value for $1 in 2004. 5% of that would bring you to $1.05 in 2025. And then going up 5% of that, I know it's not exact math, but we'll put 2 nickels here, which would represent that in 2026, it would be $1.10. And then, of course, we'll add another nickel in 2027, which would be $1.15, but actually 5% of $1.10 would give us this extra penny. So in this scenario, had we not messed with the reappraisal plan, you would actually have had a 5% increase in 2023 to 2024, a 5% increase in 2024, 2025, a 5% increase in 25, 26, and then of course a 5% increase in 2027. So looking at the difference between 2024 and 2027, you would have had a 16% increase, but you would have digested that in an average of 5%, which, by the way, in this scenario is what's been going on for basically the last 20 years. And it's been a little bit higher in the last 10, but that would be a normal increase. Let's talk about normal increase, because you're going to hear a scenario, and those that are against what I'm going to tell you are going to say, yes, but what about that single mom who owns her property and the value is going up where she can't afford it? Listen, talk to a realtor, talk to a financial planner. One of the most important decisions that most of us that are listening to this video make is we buy property, and property appraises. You live in Tarrant County. When I bought my house in 96, I paid $135,000 for it. In 2024, I'm paying property tax on $309,000. It appreciates, and it appreciates almost every year because you live in a great part of Texas. That is one of the things that comes with having a home. That's why when you turn 65 and you get the homestead is when it starts flattening out. But until that time, if you're going to buy a house, it's a piece of investment that appreciates. So that's something you need to understand. The argument to try to prevent that is not conceivable, certainly not even conceivable from the Tarrant County Appraisal District, as you'll see in scenario number 2. Now, in scenario number 2, in 2024, the previous board opted to hold down values. Now, this is an artificial hold. It's not real. And if you sell your house, you could sell it for whatever the value is. But we are frozen assets from 2024 going forward. So here, let's look at what scenario number 2. I'm going to put it under scenario number 1 so you can see what it looks like, because the assets will be frozen in 25, 26, and then they will reevaluate in 27. So even though it's frozen, it's kind of like having a credit card where you don't have to send a payment in, you're still being charged interest. And I don't think the average taxpayer understands that. So in scenario number 2, we're going to show you what happens right this second now that we are holding down the values. We're not freezing them as the word is being said. We're just holding them down on your little postcard. That's why I say we're not necessarily telling you the truth on that postcard. So let's look at scenario number 2. Okay, scenario number 2 is what happened in 2024. The previous board instigated what I'm going to call a hold down, which we refer to as the reappraisal plan, something that Tarrant County did. So again, in 2004, let's pretend that your value is $1. That $1 will carry over for residential to be $1 in 2005, thus the postcard, and $1 in 2026, and then we will reappraise the value, which is going to be $1.16, and you will have a $1.16, which, by the way, taxpayer, that means coming from 2026 to 2027, you will see a 16% increase in this particular scenario. So you're going to go from $1 to $1.16. I call this taxpayer surprise. This is not being addressed, and one of the bad things, I think, for the taxpayer in this scenario for the current reappraisal plan. So, I put this filming together and did scenario number 3 and scenario number 4, and this video turned out to be 25 minutes long. And you know what? You're not that interested in tax the way I am. In scenario 3, I dealt with the issue. Someone had mentioned to me, what happens if the values go down for 3 years? Well, you have an out of balance in the other direction. You're paying $1 and your value's like 84 cents. You could protest, but essentially you're also out of value. The reappraisal plan doesn't take that into consideration. And scenario number 4, which is maybe a 5% chance of happening, is what if values go down 1 year and they go back up? You're still out of balance by about 10%. It is the most positive scenario that could potentially happen, but it only has a 5% chance. It hasn't happened in the last 10 years, only happened once in the last 20. So now let's go into scenario 5 to kind of keep this short because you're not a tax nerd like me. You're not that interested in seeing these scenarios, but here's a scenario that I think will happen. So in this last scenario, let's review what would happen if we hadn't done the reappraisal plan. We would have had $1 in 2024. We would have had $1.05 in 2025. We'd have $1.10 in 2026, and we'd have $1.16 in 2027. This scenario represents a 5% increase, a 5% increase, and a 5% increase. Now, what I'm about to show you is what I think reality is. Keep in mind that on the reappraisal plan, the 5% increase did not happen in 2025. We still have $1 under the reappraisal plan and $1 under the reappraisal plan in 2025. But let's say, because I do believe this will happen, that a district will go out to a vote, probably blame Tad, in November, and through their golden pennies or through an election, they go and get their 5 cents back. When they get their 5 cents back, that will raise the tax rate to $1.10. You only pay $1.05, but it'll raise it to $1.10 as far as actual values are concerned. Now, what happens if we work that through? Well, that means that in 2026, the actual value will be $1.16, but we will still be frozen on $1.05. But that also means that when we get to 2027, the actual value will then return to $1.22, which means that when we get to the end result in 2027, we'll go from $1.05 to $1.22, which means at 22% increase in 2027 as a consequence of a rebuttal that maybe districts or entities will do in response to the reappraisal plan. Did we make this better for the taxpayers? My answer is absolutely not. My belief of the 5 scenarios is that this is the reality that will actually occur, and we need to fix this. So in conclusion, the reappraisal plan is bad for the city entities as well as the school district entities for loss of funding. Obviously, they're going to fall out. Some of them have the potential of falling out the PVS study over time. Some of them already have. But as I've shown you today, over time, this is a really bad thing for the taxpayer. Scenario number 5 is what I believe will happen. So what do? Well, we need to flip one seat. Here's a preview of how that last vote went. You only have to convince one person and we can get this fixed. Should we not fix this, this will be very bad for the taxpayers as well as the entity. Again, unintended consequences. Sometimes good ideas don't necessarily work out to be in the best interest of all involved. Okay, my name is Fred Campos. These are my thoughts. Please join me. I will give you another video after review. This Wednesday at 9 a.m. is our next TAD board meeting. Would love to hear from you or see you there. Otherwise, I'll give you a report towards the end of next week. Have a happy Mother's Day.